Hi everybody, Amy here, checking in with my updates for week 6. So we are well into our summary and response essay unit. I'm going to start by going over your week 5 quiz, which was dealing with the first half of our MLA conventions rules. This was actually one of our worst quizzes. I know I've said that a couple weeks in a row. Now. So please do continue emailing me if you have more specific questions than what I'm covering in these videos. I actually ended up going back and adding a couple of points back to your scores on this quiz. So what I'm going to show you here is going to look just a little different than what you saw when you were taking the quiz. That said, questions 1 and 2 were pretty straightforward, and they actually compare the questions are asking you to identify the type of source based on the information found in the works cited entry. One is a print book and one is an electronic magazine article. And so I'm going to show you the ways you can differentiate between those. So here, this is the one that is actually a print book. It is a citation that just includes the author's name last first, a title in italics. You know it's a title of a larger publication because it's in italics. Excerpts from larger publications are given in quotes. So for example, like with the articles you have been reading for the summary and response essay unit, you would be introducing those article titles in quotes with the publication titles in italics. So like Duckworth's Grit article, the title would go in quotes, but the TED Talk publication title goes in italics. And that's true for any media. You know, the larger publication always goes in italics, and then an excerpt from a larger publication goes in quotes. So even if it was like an album, musical album, and you had a song off of that record, you would put the song title in quotes and the album title in italics. Okay, so then the other thing that we'll notice is that it is in print because there's no electronic access information here. So if there was a DOI or a URL or some kind of web information, that would indicate that it was accessed in electronic form. But since that's not there, we know it is print. And so you can see a reverse example of that in question 2, where we actually do have some electronic access information. So that tells us that it is a web article. And we know it's actually an article, not the magazine itself, because we have the article title in quotes followed by the magazine title in italics, as I was talking about before. So the correct answer is B, an online article from a magazine. Now I mentioned that I added some points back in. One of those questions was question 5. When we go to our question stats, which I'll go to here so you can see. Nobody got this right. It's kind of weird because when I actually went in and looked at your scores, some of you did get it right, but this is saying that the average grade was a 0, so I think only 2 of you got it right. So I actually went in and gave everybody points for this one, so even if you missed it, you got the points. Or I'm sorry, that was question 6. I'm just getting them confused. I'll show you question 5 first. I actually did end up going back and giving points for both of these questions, so it really doesn't matter. So this one is asking you what the in-text citation should be based on this MLA works cited entry, which is correct. And in this case, the correct option is D. It's a shortened version of the title in quotation marks. So what we have here is a book, or excuse me, a chapter from a book called Jane Austen, A Brief Biography. The title of the larger text is the Jane Austen Society of North America. This is not the author. Jane Austen is not the author in this case. This is a book about Jane Austen. You can tell that by just reading a little bit about the title itself, getting clues from the title itself. Therefore, Austen is not the correct answer because she's not the author. If that was the author, you would have the author's last name in the parenthetical in the in-text citation, but because there's no author here, we're going to go with the title, which would be the first thing that comes up in the citation, because when there's no author, you just leave that part off and start with the title. So this is a pretty long title. It's all right then to abbreviate it and use just the first couple of words. However, since it's in quotes in our works cited entry, it needs to be in quotes in the in-text citation as well. This is indicative of a rule that is probably the most important thing for you to learn about any documentation style, which is that there needs to be a one-to-one correspondence between the first word of the citation and whatever word you use to refer to it in text. So since the first word of this citation is Jane Austen, that's what we're going to use in text. And since it's the title, not her actual name as the author of this text, it goes in quotes. If the citation wasn't an excerpt, if it was this entire publication, if the citation started with this, then B would have been correct. So I know that's confusing, but if you have further questions about it, just let me know. Question 6 was another one that I ended up going back and giving everybody points for, just because it was also confusing. But it basically reflects the same rule, which is that there needs to be that one-to-one correspondence between the first word of the works cited entry and whatever you use to refer to it in text. So this one didn't have any instructions on it. I've already gone and added them in here, but when you saw it, there weren't any instructions, and so I understand that's why everybody got it wrong. So I did go back in and give you the points for this one, but again, because this citation starts with the title in quotes, critical thinking, that is going to be the correct answer of what you would use to refer to it in text. And you can see here why these are incorrect. All right, so just a couple more. I do want to talk about questions 8 and 9 because these were also pretty frequently missed, but it's things that you really just have to memorize about MLA. So here for question 8, you're going to see a question about how you refer to text with more than 4 authors. And in MLA only, you use an abbreviation called ETAL, et al., and it's Latin for and others. So you would do the first author that appears. You're not going to alphabetize them yourself. You're just going to go with whoever is up front first on the text because that's usually the primary author. And then it'll be in last first format, and then you do comma, ET space AL period. And it will always look that way. And if you were to refer to this text with an in-text citation, the whole thing here would go in your parenthetical or in your author tag. Okay, so A is the right answer. EB'd, that's I think for Chicago style, etc. Nobody uses that. There's some instances in APA when you would list them all, but not every instance. MLA is pretty straightforward. It's just the ETAL kind of is a catch-all for anything more than 3 authors. And then question 9 is another one that we need to memorize. This question is asking you whether or not you need to abbreviate months in MLA, and in fact you do abbreviate months longer than 4 letters. So if it was May, June, you're not going to abbreviate those, but April you would abbreviate, March you would abbreviate because it's more than 4 letters. So again, just something you have to memorize. All right, so I'm going to come out of here and go back to my screen. And I also want to talk a little bit more specifically about quoting and paraphrasing in particular because of some of the things that I saw coming up on your journal last week, and I've given you all individual feedback on the journal, but it also came up in your week 5 discussion. So I'm going to go back to that. It was the summary writing discussion. I'm just going to kind of jump in there. Even though we've moved forward from it. So this came up in Leslie's reflection at the end of the week, so I wanted to make sure you all saw that because I know, again, we've kind of moved on and you might not have gone back to read these. She says, this week I have mainly developed some ideas about how to write a good summary. The first sentence of my summary should include the title of the article, the name of the author, then the author's thesis, which is written in my own words, should be presented. Author tags should be used to tell the readers who the ideas belong to. If I want to copy the author's original language, I should use quotation marks, and more importantly, the summary should be objective and not include my own opinion. So that really sums it up very, very nicely. You know, when you're paraphrasing, you need to put it in your own words. When you are quoting, you need to make sure that you have the exact words from the original, that you're not changing anything, and it needs to go in quotes. But I do like what Leslie says here about paraphrasing the thesis in particular. It's really hard to find one specific sentence in any of these texts that sums up everything. Authors usually don't come out and wrap it up quite so nicely for you in a tight little package like that. But as a reader, after engaging with the entire text, you can step back and say, okay, what was the main idea here? What was the most important thing? So for Duckworth, for example, you know you're going to have to say something about grit. You're going to have to say something about What does not help a person succeed, like IQ, good looks, talent. You're going to have to say something about the fact that she applies this to an academic and professional context. And then that's about it. I mean, I think pretty much everything else she says can fall into one of those categories. Even when she brings up the growth mindset at the end, that's part of her definition of grit. So, again, she doesn't ever come right out and put all those things in one sentence for you, but as a reader, you kind of step back and say, okay, what are the big highlights here? And then you paraphrase a thesis that covers all of that stuff. It also came up in Jonathan's comment on Jessica's thread. So let me go find that one here. So Jonathan said, good job, I think you got the summary figured out. I learned through comments on my own post that it's better to put some things in your own words rather than cite them, at least in this exercise. Finding the balance is important, like finding a balance in everything. So Jonathan is totally right. It is all about finding a balance. I mean, in a summary, you're trying to be concise, so you do want to rely more heavily on paraphrase. But then in the response portion of your essay, when you're bringing in examples from the text to back up your points of agreement and disagreement, you might decide to quote instead because quoting kind of does a better job indicating exactly the flavor of what the writer was saying. So again, it's just a balance. I do want to point out that even when you put things in your own words, you still have to cite them. So that's maybe just a little misconception here, Jonathan. Just because it's in your own words doesn't mean it doesn't get cited. You need to cite both quote and paraphrase with attributive tags or parenthetical citations using, again, that first word from whatever the works cited entry is going to be at the end of the essay. And then finally, some of this also came up in Gray's reflection at the end of the week. You can see some of that in his comment there, but I think it gets summed up a little bit better here. You can see at the end of his own thread, Gray has posted his reflection. Thank you so much for your feedback. In reading all your comments, I know that I will need to use more author tags and not let them fade closer to the end and use them throughout all of my paragraphs. I will also make sure that I use names instead of she and the author, which are pronouns. I will also make sure I continue to give the author credit in every single sentence. And so I was really glad to see Gray sum this up because these were the things we were telling him throughout the week, but it's also true for all of you. Everything that Gray is saying here is something that every single one of you needs to do in your summary and then in any of the sentences that you pull from the text throughout your response. So if you're quoting Duckworth to provide an example of what you disagree with, you need to have an author tag or a parenthetical, use quotation marks if it's the exact words, and all of that, just like you would in a summary. And actually, it's even more important to make those distinctions in the response portion of your essay because you're going to be pulling in your ideas along with the writers, and so you don't want to get those things mixed up. All right, so this definitely bleeds into the discussion that we are engaging in right now for week 6, which is moving on from the summary to writing the response. And for the most part, you all did a really good job with this. So as far as where we are in the unit, I think you're a little ahead of where students in past semesters have been at this point. So that's great to see. But there still are a few specific things that I want to make sure you're doing in these response paragraphs. And most of you did do a good job coming right out and saying at the beginning of your paragraph, I agree with X, or I find Y to be pretty unbelievable, or A, B, and C did not resonate with me, or whatever. But I do want to emphasize this because it's really, really important that you do state those response points in your topic sentences in the response portion of the essay, because otherwise it's going to feel like your paragraphs are focused on summary instead. So you can see Gray right here says, I agree with Malcolm Gladwell's statement that practice makes a master. So this is one thing that he's agreeing with, and then he goes right into a paraphrase of what Gladwell says, builds on it with some of his own ideas before the end of the paragraph. Then the next one starts out. One thing that I don't agree with that Gladwell says is that you need to have 10,000 hours to become a master. So, and this is a really good point because, it's like, I think some of you initially felt like you totally agreed with these writers or there might not be anything you could disagree with. But here we see Gray, it's really just a subtle distinction. He does agree about the idea of practice. He just disagrees that 10,000 hours of practice is necessary. So you might have felt like, well, I'm not really disagreeing here, but it is still a disagreement if you are saying, but this one little part of it doesn't work for me, that kind of a thing. So great, you did a really good job with this. And again, most of you did. There were just a couple of you who were starting out the paragraph with summary. So that's what I want to warn you against. I also want to encourage you all to be pretty specific in each of your response points. If you are making a response point or a point of response to something in the article that's like the entire thesis, you probably are going to have to break that out into multiple points. So I agree with this part, I disagree with that part. Megan says here, the 10,000 hour rule by Malcolm Gladwell suggests that the idea that talent plus practice results in achievement. This is a lot of summary, so I just want to point that out. This would be more appropriate for the beginning of the essay, but then we do have some response here. I believe in Gladwell's research mostly because of the life I was born into and the obstacles I've had to overcome. So this is an example where I think you could be a little bit more specific. It still does a great job stating the point of agreement and disagreement right up front in the topic sentence, but when you say you're agreeing with the research or you believe in the research, I wonder, are you really referring to the research that he cites, like the Erickson study and Beatles, Mozart, those examples? You believe in those, you believe they're accurate and true, or are you trying to say that you agree with the idea of practice or 10,000 hours or some other part of it? I think being just a little more specific there would really help the point stay focused, because you'll see later in the paragraph we kind of stray away from this original idea about the research. And so if you had a little clearer idea of exactly what you're agreeing with here, I think it would help you keep focused on that throughout the rest of the paragraph. Along with that, you want to make sure that you only have one point of agreement and disagreement in each paragraph. And if you're saying multiple things that you agree or disagree with in a paragraph, it probably needs to be broken in two. So this came up in Kendall's, which also started out with a little bit of summary. That's okay, because she's still got a good topic sentence here. This will still work for the response. But there's definitely 2 points embedded here, because Kendall's saying, you know, I believe in Gladwell's theory because of my upbringing. This is another one that probably needs to be teased out even further. So what part of the theory are you agreeing with his entire argument? Are there some more specific parts of his argument that you could zoom in or narrow in on? Then in the second half of the paragraph we hear, however, there is a certain personal spectrum to how successful you can be with practice. So this is really a disagree point. I would say you basically only have to hit the enter key and separate these into 2 distinct paragraphs, one that's agreeing and one that's disagreeing, and then you can expand those further, give more examples, and that's really how you write your paper, because you're going to take this from a 1-paragraph discussion post into a multiple paragraph response, which will take up about 2/3 of your essay. Add in your response thesis, and then you can attach it to a summary, an intro, and a conclusion, and that kind of thing. All right, so if you have questions about that, let me know. That's the overall outline or structure of how you're going to write your paper. And then once you have those ideas mapped out for your response points in each of those response paragraphs, you're going to fill in the paragraphs with examples from your own personal life. So Jessica is one that was doing a really good job with this. Jessica, your details are so concrete, so specific and personal, well described. All of this stuff about showing interest in the piano, wanting to be the next Alicia Keys is very relatable, helps us get to know you. And so if the rest of you are wondering how specific should I be in bringing in examples from my own life or people I know, Jessica is a good example here. This also came up in Kendall's comments on Leslie's post. So if we look down here, Leslie's, of course, always is in really good shape. So that's another good example you can look at. But Kendall was getting really personal here. She says, you know, I tend to feel alienated when I visit other language-speaking countries and hang out with multilingual friends in large groups. Often wished I spoke a given language. I applaud you and all the time you spent becoming fluent. My hobby that I chose to put time into is cycling, and when you're training for a long ride, you have a pattern of increasing your miles to help you gain distance. Training harder for anything is tiring, and some days you want to skip, but when you do go back, gaining the last momentum is harder. I like that you pointed out the role interest has to play in what you get out of the time you spend, and I understand for you it seems the #1 factor. I just want to point out the stuff you're saying in these comments can go into your essay too. So Kendall, these are all really good examples that you could even use in your own response paragraphs about why you agree or disagree with certain parts of Gladwell's argument. And then here, The idea of pointing out the role interest has to play in something, that's something that's kind of missing from Gladwell's article. So that might end up being one of your disagree points if you're looking for other paragraphs to include in the response portion of your essay. But overall, all the comments that have been done so far this week from Kendall, Bethany, Leslie, they're all really good. So if the rest of you are looking for examples of what you should be talking about in your comments, which are due tonight at midnight, do go ahead and take a look at those examples because they're good ones for you to follow. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is just check in with the assignment sheet because some of the strategies that are indicated there are things that tie in directly to everything I've been talking about already in this video. Whoops. So all the quote and paraphrasing stuff, all the response and summary and all of that. So let's just take a look. We are down here. We've read all the articles. We're well through step 1. We're well through step 2. You've done all your annotating, or at least you will have by the end of this week. We are moving on to the response portion of your essay. So as far as step 3 goes, you've come up with a couple of ideas that you could use in a response if you're writing about the article you have chosen, or excuse me, if you're writing about the Gladwell article. You could also write about the article that you wrote your summary about last week, the Duckworth article, or you could choose the Dweck article. So at this point, you at least have the skills to get through parts 3 and 4 of step 3, so you can brainstorm some of those response points, use it to come up with an overall thesis, and then separate that into body paragraphs, provide topic sentences that state the reasons why you agree or disagree, and then develop examples like we just saw in Jessica's discussion. We'll get to the conclusion stuff next week, but your rough draft is due Wednesday, so I just want to keep all of this on your radar. And remember, I mentioned earlier, you're going to be kind of working forward to plan your paper this way, but then you'll work backward and look at the ideas you've come up with and really refine that thesis and revise it based on the response points that you're actually making. And then hone your paragraphs as well. So we really are through almost through step 3. So at this point, you should be able to get about this far, and we will work on the rest of this 4 and 5 stuff next week as we develop your actual rough drafts of the essay, and then we'll be talking about revision, of course. But again, down here on the strategies, these always follow chronologically with those steps as well. So this will show you, you're going to start your paper with a brief thesis, just giving an overview of whichever topic you're covering based on the article that you choose. Then you include your summary. You have the skills to go ahead and write this. These are details about the summary, how to introduce the article, how to focus, how to organize your summary. Then it'll show you how to organize your response. It should be about 2/3 of the overall essay. So based on this week's discussion, you can start brainstorming those response points and start to formulate a thesis statement. There's some ideas here for how to come up with points, what examples to bring in, and that kind of thing. And then as we've been talking about, you're using quoting and paraphrasing, attributive tags, and MLA bibliographic style and formatting. And then I'll come back to the rubric next week once we start talking more about actually drafting the essay, your rough drafts, and revising them, but I always want to keep this on your radar, so make sure you're checking that out and keeping it in the back of your mind. And then finally, I'll just go over your homework this weekend. It's quite a bit, so I want to make sure that you're aware of everything you need to do. Of course, you'll need to comment on two of your classmates' discussion posts by midnight tonight, and then reflect on your own thread by midnight on Sunday. If you haven't already, you'll do your week 6 journal, which is focused on critical thinking and might help you come up with some ideas of agreement or disagreement or things to criticize in the text. Of course, you'll have to have already read the 10,000 hour rule, but make sure you upload those annotations to the Dropbox by midnight on Sunday as well. And then working all the way down here, your grammar work this week is on commas. There's some practice quizzes before your graded quiz. And then, because we are in week 6 of the semester and it's kind of a slump, Deb's come up with some materials for how to stay motivated, and there's a discussion there. So again, this is just an informal discussion. Due at midnight on Sunday. You don't have to post multiple times, but if you do, by all means, it really helps keep the discussion going. And I've seen a couple of you have already posted there, so I'm going to be commenting on those posts as well. All right, so if you have questions about any of those assignments, please let me know. And again, just keep it in the back of your mind that your rough drafts of the essay are due next week. But otherwise, I look forward to seeing the rest of your work for week 6. Thanks.